Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and in this episode, we are joined by our guest, Günter Younger. Günter works as the Director of Intelligence and Investigations for the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA. He comes to this position from a background in law enforcement, and today he is joining us to talk about the role of whistleblowers in anti-doping and the steps being taken to protect them. So, Günter, we are excited to have you with us today. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Marie, and thank you very much for inviting me for this very thrilling topic for me.
Oh, wonderful. We are excited to get into the details, but I'd love to start off by just talking about your job there as WADA's Director of Intelligence and Investigation. So what does this role entail?
Perhaps I start when we started the Intelligence and Investigations Department, which was in 2016. So actually, WADA had no investigative capabilities until then. So with the start of the department, I created immediately a whistleblower hotline and recruited investigator and analysts and confidential source manager in our team. We had a small team with the beginning. At the moment, we have 3 units. One unit is the investigation unit. One unit is the confidential information management unit, and I can highlight and explain a bit more on this unit as it refers to the whistleblower. And the latest development is the compliance investigation section. So at the moment, we have 17 people by the end of the year. We have a deputy director who replaces me when I'm absent, and he coordinates and runs all operations within the department. What we do on a daily basis, of course, our main source is speak up. When the message we receive, we triage them with the team, with our experts. We do some assessment on the information on confidential source, and then we decide what to do as a next step. We develop a strategy, and perhaps we reach out to our stakeholders and work with them on different cases. I think that's the nutshell of what we are doing at our department.
Oh, fantastic. And you mentioned a term that some of our listeners out there might not be familiar with, confidential sources. Oftentimes that's used to refer to whistleblowers. So we'll use those terms kind of interchangeably during our interview today. And you mentioned the Speak Up Network. I'd love to talk about this as well. Can you tell us more about this confidential route that whistleblowers or confidential sources can use to get information through?
Yeah, it's a secure and encrypted tool that we use. We have an external provider who provides us with this service. Therefore, we have no access to the owner of the information because we want to really make sure that the confidentiality of the information is maintained. And therefore, we have this tool in order to see what kind of allegations our clients are providing us, in particular, of course, doping or any other allegations. So it works like a normal hotline. Information comes to us. We usually, if possible, get back to the informant or the whistleblower, try to get more information, try to learn more about the circumstances, and then we hope we can establish a relationship with the person.
Fantastic. And now you've been in this position for about 5 years. You mentioned this whole department within WADA was just established in 2016. So what are some of your priorities right now for the intelligence and investigations team?
Of course, we are still in the consolidation phase. It's a very young department, and we have now 15 people and the processes that we have put in place. At the moment, what we see as a new priority for us is to help our stakeholders as well to establish and to build capacity or intelligence investigation capabilities. As I'm comparing it with a train, our team is powerful enough to be the engine in the intelligence and investigation world, but we need a lot of wagons in order to cover all the sports and all the athletes. Therefore, we try to get as many on board so that the longer the train is, the more we can cover in the anti-doping world.
Definitely. And I think this is a really fascinating area of anti-doping, but how did you specifically get into maybe anti-doping more generally and these anti-doping investigations?
As you said, Maria, I'm from law enforcement, and back in 2009, I was the head of drugs at Interpol. And at that time, WADA approached Interpol because WADA wanted at that time to involve more law enforcement in this area. And as I was the head of drugs, I was asked whether I could as well deal with doping. And we agreed. So this was the first, let's say, relationship or cooperation that we had with WADA at that time. Later on, in 2015, when I was already back in the Bavarian police, I was called in December 2014 when the ARD published the documentary about Russia And I was asked whether I would be a member of this independent commission investigating into Russia and the IAAF allegations. And this is where I came from.
Fascinating. We've mentioned this law enforcement background. So if you have to summarize it, what are maybe the big differences between how you approach law enforcement investigations versus anti-doping investigations?
The techniques are the same. So as an investigator, you have techniques how to gather information, but the big difference is the power. So as a law enforcement, you can search a house, you can arrest people, you can seize evidence, whatever you find. While we at WADA, we have no power to search, we have no power to seize incriminated material or evidence. What we can do, we can conduct interviews that are voluntary, and we can do open source research. So we are very limited in our possibilities to find evidence. So this is why in 2016, I said, if we have not the power, we need to focus on what is the most value source for us. And these are the whistleblowers. In this respect, and especially with the lessons learned in the last 5 years, as well shown that the reputation of an organization can be severely damaged in the public eye by the actions of a small number of persons. And if you look at the IWF or the IBU that we started investigating, and we want to help our signatories with the proposed authority as it enables exposure of individuals guilty of misconduct with the cooperation of the signatory. So what I'm saying is we're trying to help signatories to find, let's say, the black sheep in their organization and to remove them, as it is not good for the anti-doping community. So that's one of my targets, perhaps to enlarge or to extend a little bit more our power that we have, because it's not completely new. Some states have already extended possibilities to support the investigations like downloading phone data, etc. But we from WADA, we have no rights at all.
Certainly. And you recently publicly discussed this need for better whistleblower protection in anti-doping. So what kind of measures are in place right now to protect whistleblowers?
As I said at the beginning, in 2016, when I created the department, I knew that whistleblower will be the key for our success. And to just give you an example of all the investigation we have done so far, or have conducted, there was always a whistleblower informant involved. So without them, there would be far less success from our side. Therefore, back in 2017, I created the CIU, which are professional source handlers, mainly with law enforcement background, not only to acknowledge the importance of whistleblowers or confidential source, but also to provide professional counsel to them who can speak and act on behalf and make sure that their interests are respected. So how we're going to work is, as soon as we have this information through our Speak Up, one of our source managers, handlers, contact the informant, have a chat with him about the situation, about the private situation, about motivation, what the concerns are there any security risk for the person, in order to find out what actually is the best avenue for this person. And then the source handler will be the bridge to the investigations. So none of my investigator or analyst will meet our sources. Only the CIU, so the confidential source handler, knows the identity of the source. And that's very important for us, because what we can't do as WADA, and this is sometimes what we hear in the media, like witness protection versus confidentiality. And I can assure you, coming from law enforcement, no one wants to be in a witness protection, because you have to give up your friends, your family, your country probably. You need to move. And we see it with Dr. Rodchenkov in the US. That's not a nice life that we want to have for our sources. Therefore, confidentiality of the identity is the utmost goal for us to reach. And we are very proud in the last 5 years, none of our whistleblowers have been disclosed or published, and they can live on their life. And this is what we want to help us to clean sport. And we help them to be satisfied with hopefully with our results, but also to continue their life that they love.
Definitely. And I think some of those points that you made really emphasize just the importance of protecting that confidentiality, making sure their identity stays hidden. And I think when our listeners out there maybe hear the term whistleblower, they may immediately think of athletes fulfilling this role, but it can also be others within the sport community. So Günter, can you comment on what other roles or other people might be reaching out to you with concerns about doping violations?
Athletes, of course, but as well coaches, officials of organizations. sometimes not even in sport involved, but perhaps having a relationship to someone. So whistleblower is very broad. We are not focusing on only athletes or involved in sport, but of course has a link to sport and has knowledge about whatever the person wants to provide to us.
Certainly. And maybe without getting into the specifics of the strategies you plan to roll out there, what kinds of protection, Günter, do you have in mind for whistleblowers in the future? How do you plan to improve these protections?
One thing that sometimes struggle is in law enforcement, it is possible, for instance, that the identity of sources can be protected even in front of court under, of course, strict conditions. With the result management process, if an athlete gets caught and wants to help and disclose his or her knowledge, then in the result management, it's a bit more complicated because it is expected that the identity is known. And as well, after the substantial assistance, which is a reduction of the sanction, the athlete, the name needs to be published, and as well, the sanction needs to be published. So it's quite complicated because, of course, the other side might see, okay, why does this person suddenly get a reduction? And of course, make then an assumption that this might be the one providing the evidence that is used now against me. Therefore, we are trying to figure out new avenues and new ways of disguising that a bit more. We are very happy with our legal department, who is very supportive in this area. It can be a bit better in the future, and we will work with that because the more cases we have, the more, of course, this topic will be discussed amongst experts.
Absolutely. And perhaps we'll jump ahead a little bit right to the specific dilemma that you brought up here, where there is a whistleblower who is an athlete, and it becomes really difficult to maintain that anonymity because you see this change, for example, in the ban or whatever the outcome is of their anti-doping violation. So can you explain how this is managed? How do you deal with this sort of situation with athletes who are cooperating in an anti-doping rule violation investigation?
I can only speak from what we usually try to do is whatever the athlete provides, it needs to be corroborated with other evidence. So the best avenue is to find the evidence without using the source. Because at the end, nobody will ask you, how did you find it? I compare it usually with the needle in the haystack. If someone tells you, start looking on the right side, on the very right side, on the top, and you find something at the end, no one will question, why did you start at the very top right side?
Sure.
You were just lucky. So that's always the best if we can use the information to guide us, but we don't need it. But of course, there are cases where the information is so exclusive that it's going to be hard. And this is then the job of the whistleblower manager to assess the risk and then perhaps come back with, no, we will not share this information because that would immediately disclose you. But what we can do is we can show the investigator, this is the evidence. You don't get it. Try to find a way to get it in your investigation. And this is quite exciting because then our investigators and analysts need to be creative and find ways to get there, but not using the source. That's always the creative part of our investigation. And with the limited possibilities that we have, it's even more creative. And I have very good people who have good ideas of how to find then the evidence.
Excellent. Well, let's maybe dive into some of the concerns that whistleblowers may have. So from a security standpoint, what are some of the security concerns that anti-doping whistleblowers might face if they come forward with information?
It can vary from retaliation or the fear that they lose their job if it's suddenly known or considered as traitors in some countries. This is why we use now confidential sources in whistleblowers, because in some countries it has a bad meaning, or the fear for their lives. The most complicated fear is the emotional fear, because sometimes you cannot address emotional fear. Because if you feel that you're threatened or you feel that someone is surveying you, you cannot really grasp it. So this is where it needs a social or a very psychological approach to give the person the confidence that perhaps the emotions are, of course, there because you expose the most secrets and you exposed yourself to provide this information. So we are very careful in our approach of giving you the time and the feeling that you are safe. Of course, if there is, let's say, actual or physical threats, then we have usually good contacts with law enforcement and then we can help with that. But we try to avoid that and we try to find a way to keep the person as safe as possible.
Definitely. And I think these security concerns are a big concern for whistleblowers. This might be one of the main reasons why people aren't coming forward. But what are some of the other barriers that may prevent someone from taking action?
One thing is the uncertainty, what is happening after the disclosure. When I started and I had some interviews with whistleblowers, I said, so why are you coming forward or what is your concern? And the first concern back in 2018 was we didn't know where to go to. There was nobody that we could address. There are some hotlines, but we don't know what is actually happening behind the hotline. So the lack of knowledge about the procedure. So this is where we are very transparent. If you go on our website, you see the whistleblower policy, you see exactly what are your rights and what are your responsibilities as well. Therefore, I think very important is that the person who comes forward, first, that the person can trust you, that you have a reputation of that you can keep the information confidential. If I ask you, would you share your deepest secret with me now? You will probably say, no, why should I? But if you have to because you need help or you want to change something, you would have some arguments. You would look for, okay, who can I trust and who can help me? And what is happening with the information? This is why I have professional ones. All these things we address at the very beginning when we meet first time with the person in order to establish this relationship, that you're reliable, that you can tell what is happening. Sometimes they are not so patient, but you have to tell them that it takes longer because we want to make sure that you are safe. And what is then happening with me after that? So we have a pre, during, and post-investigation care of the person. So we try to address all these, in particular, emotional aspects that are very important at the beginning.
Absolutely. And I think it is so important that you have that sort of full life cycle of not just you get the information and you move on, but kind of walking through what happens next with people. Because I think it is a black box for a lot of people out there. They think, okay, so you report what you've seen or you report what you've heard and then it's over. But I think that's not the case in so many of these situations. So even though every case might be a little bit different, Günter, can you walk us through an example of what might happen for a whistleblower from that moment they decide to report a rule violation or a suspected rule violation all the way to the end of their involvement with the case?
Let's say the informant or the whistleblower decided to provide allegations against an athlete. It goes through Speak Up. We have a team who looks every day on our Speak Up dashboard. The first thing then is to do some background checks on the information. Can it be true? Is the athlete real? What are the allegations? Perhaps the informant provides already some other information. So we do a due diligence, and then usually we go back to this person, if possible, that we always encourage, because there's always some questions. And then we ask about the motivation, why this person came forward, what do you expect from us? So getting a feeling of the person who wants to work and what are the motivations for that. After that, we try to say, okay, let me go back. We will do some research. We will do some checks on our databases, and then we will come back to you. And then we explain a strategy of what we do. Then we come back, say, okay, we will start an investigation. We will try to test the athlete, whatever. So there are different options. Therefore, we give you the advice of perhaps stay back now and do nothing, because otherwise it might interfere with that. And the whistleblower manager is constantly approachable for you. If you have any concerns, if you see something that doesn't really feel good, you come back and the source handler is only for you. If there are questions from the investigator, then the questions will be addressed to the source and the source will respond. It will go back to the informant and say, we have a question in this regard. Can you please help us and answer that? And then, of course, we provide that to the investigator. So this is where we go. At the end of the investigation, let's say it works out well and we could establish an athlete being caught, whatever. Then there is this aftercare where our team provides the whistleblower with information of what happened, of what is the result. And then is there anything else that we can do, and let us know if there is any attempts of getting to know who was the one providing the information to WADA. If not, then feel safe. If so, then come back and we will try to figure out how we can assist you in your situation. So that's in general the procedure that we have in place.
Certainly. And I think in some instances, cases may then proceed to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, or CAS. So is there pressure to name whistleblowers when you're working with CAS? And if so, how do you deal with that circumstance?
So far, I had only one case, and of course, it was the biggest that we have. It's about Russia. And of course, everyone knows that we have a copy of the Moscow laboratory database, so it's called LIMS. And of course, during the CAS hearing, Russia requested to get the original of our database and of course the names of who provided. And I declined it as that would have disclosed the identity of the whistleblower. And CAS, it's like a court. The court has to consider all the evidence available, and they have to ask on behalf of the opponents and the other party to provide all the evidence that is available. For them, it's more important to protect the integrity of the hearing. But it's my job for the I&I department to protect the informant. And therefore, as I'm not the investigator, I can decline that, and I will decline if I have a feeling that the balance of providing this information would endanger my source. In particular, that we would not do anything without the consent of the whistleblower. And in this respect, we will counsel to get out if it's too dangerous for this person.
Definitely. And I think encouraging these whistleblowers to come forward, making them comfortable, gaining that trust and educating them on the process is so critical. I'm curious, though, if this results then in more whistleblowers feeling comfortable and coming forward, how does WADA then manage the volume of information that might be coming in?
I fully agree, Marie. Trust is so sensitive. And you know that in your daily life, if you lose trust once, it's like a broken window. You can perhaps fix, but there will always be cracks and there will always be this doubt of her. Therefore, we are really very serious with how you can trust us and how we keep your identity and how we take confidentiality seriously in our daily work. We don't want to lose one of our clients because we know if we lose that trust, there might be others say, oh no, you cannot trust WADA. I don't want that. And this is why we put a lot of resources in that. In this respect, we are trying to really figure out how we can establish the trust and convince our whistleblowers to come forward. The volume that we have at the moment is still workable, meaning our management was very generous. As I said, I started with 1, now we are 17. That means WADA management acknowledged the importance of that work that we are doing and provided us the resources. So at the moment, we can handle them. I mean, we can always have more, but I'm very confident that we can handle the volume to identify those cases that we should run. Most of the cases we share with our stakeholders and ask them to investigate. We are not taking up every case that comes through Speak Up.
Certainly. So in your mind, Günter, how large of a role do whistleblowers play in anti-doping and keeping sport clean?
They're the key. Like a private person, if you have to investigate something, if I ask you, Marie, you say, can you investigate, I don't know, Germany, the NATO? And you can look into internet and you can perhaps ask some persons, but they're voluntarily. And if you ask them in an interview, they of course deny any allegations. You need to have some more evidence. So the only really source that we have to get evidence are whistleblowers. Also, they are our eyes in the sport. We cannot be everywhere. Therefore, we need them in order to see and to learn what's going on in the respective sport and then to put actions in that. At the beginning, I was told, so you really want our own unit for the confidential source management? And I said, yes, because that's the key. That's the beginning. If we fail already there, we will not have any investigations. I didn't really count all the charges and all the persons that we removed during the last 5 years. But I think we are close to 300 athletes or officials due to potential ADRVs or misconduct that we achieved since 2016 and only because of whistleblowers.
Well, that is phenomenal. And I know you mentioned that WADA has been dedicating a significant amount of resources to this area, but there's always some limits. So if you had all of the resources you could dream up, whether it's funding, staff, you name it, is there one problem in anti-doping that you would want to solve most?
As I said, it doesn't help if WADA gets stronger and stronger with our capabilities because we still need our partners. And as I explained with my analogy with the train, we are happy to be the engine in the intelligence investigations world, but we need more wagons. So if you had all the resources that you said, then I would like to provide our partners and stakeholders with the right I&I resources because only together we are strong and we need this network. And this is what I put on my agenda for the coming years, that we will invest more resources to strengthen the I&I capabilities of our stakeholders. We also hope that our stakeholders acknowledge the added value of having these capabilities and invest more in capacities. So that's going to be my mission for the next 2 years. Also, and this is as well important for our stakeholders, is to have a better relationship with law enforcement on an international scale. So therefore, we have now with Europol, with Interpol, we have already a good network. But we reach out to local law enforcement. Since 2016, we've been working with more than 10 law enforcement, and now they are approaching us already. So that's already a good sign that we are trustworthy and reliable for them as experts in the anti-doping world, and they see the doping not only as an individual case, but criminal networks that use this platform to generate a lot of money.
Absolutely. And I think strengthening those relationships with strategic partners and with the stakeholders is important. So when you say stakeholders, can you give some examples of the types of groups and organizations and individuals that you mean?
So mainly it's the anti-doping organizations, in particular the NADOs, so the national anti-doping organizations that every country has a NADO, and of course the international federations that cover the sport itself. So that are our main stakeholders for. So the NADO can investigate, but as well the IFs. And we have now a very strong partner, which is the ITA, that has already capacities in investigations, and they as well act on behalf of some federations. So I think it's a partnership, and the more we have, the better it is.
Absolutely. Well, I know in my experience, the anti-doping community has been incredibly collaborative. What has your experience been like joining this anti-doping community?
That's a really good point, and I'm still here. That means it can't be so bad. And I have to start with WADA. I haven't seen any organization in my life with so many committed people to anti-doping. So everyone here believes what they are doing. They try to do the best. I mean, we always have to suffer when there is limited resources. But as well with whistleblowers, usually when I worked with whistleblowers in law enforcement, and usually they want something, a reduction of their sentence, or they want money. But in sports, and there's a third category, that there are so many people out there who really believe in clean sport and they want a clean sport. And they're not asking for money. They're not asking for anything. Just please help us to clean sport, because this is what we're all about. So that's really something that is so nice for me to see, that not always it's about money or your own purpose. It's the belief in the sport and the integrity of sport. They ask us to help them in maintaining the sport and clean the sport in order to remove all these people that are bad for the reputation of sport.
Absolutely. Well said, Günter. And I know we covered a lot of ground in our conversation today. If you've piqued the interest of our listeners out there and they would like to learn more, what is the best way for them to do so?
Lots of information is available on our website, on WADA's website. Like we have policies, you can read the investigation policy, you can read the whistleblower confidential source policy, how we work, so the investigative framework, what are the stages of an investigation, the timelines, so that everyone should know how we work. We want to be transparent. And I believe strongly in transparency, but also fairness. In an investigation, even the respondent on our side, it's a fair process. We will not try to condemn someone, because our job is not to condemn. Our job is to find the facts and to understand what happened. And we are not the ones judging what we have found. I'm a strong believer that these two elements should be separated in an investigation. If you're a potential whistleblower or a confidential source and you have knowledge, of course, about misconduct and doping in sport, then please reach out to us. We are here to listen, and I hope I could get through with the message that at the beginning, even if you not feel comfortable, there is no obligation at the beginning to come forward with the information. If you're not comfortable, listen to what we have to offer. We will keep your information confidential. If you then decide, no, I don't want to, I don't feel comfortable, we will not push you, and it's your decision. I think the first contact, see it as a counseling, getting comfortable with the team, with the person you talk to. We will not let you down with whatever you decide, and we will be happy to be your voice for the clean sport and to help clean athletes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And thanks, WADA, for providing this really valuable resource to whistleblowers out there and to sport more generally. And we really appreciate you, Günter, joining us today to talk about this topic. So thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you, Marie, and it was really a pleasure. And as I said, please feel free to get in contact with us if you have any further questions. I'm here to listen, but also I'm here to answer your questions.
Definitely. Well, listeners, get connected. It's been great to have you with us, listeners. And if you haven't had a chance yet, we would truly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform to share your experience with the show. And we hope you'll join us for our next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.